A very good afternoon to you. This is your Daytime Update right here on Newsroom Africa, Channel 405, as we continue keeping you abreast of all your day's breaking and developing stories. As President Cyril Ramaphosa testifies at the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, the effects of state capture continue to be felt. State-owned entities continue to suffer financial strain because of years of corruption as well as incompetence. South African Airways, PRASA and Eskom are just some of the entities that have suffered material losses that continue to be felt. And the big question is, when will they recover? And what will it take in order to have a turnaround strategy for not only these SOEs, but all of the state-owned entities? For more on this, I'm joined on the line by Mr. Moeng, a brand strategist, as well as Mr. Wayne Duvenhage, the Chief Executive Officer at the organization Undoing Tax Abuse. Gentlemen, a very good afternoon to both of you. Let me start with you, Mr. Moeng. When we look at state-owned enterprises and the testimonies that we've been hearing and the manner and the mechanisms of running state-owned entities, what would you say is the common thread that runs through them? How would we describe the state of South Africa's SOEs?
Well, thank you very much, Tammy. Hello, and to your guests out there, and to Mr. Duvena. Look, the SOEs damaged not just financially, operationally, but they're also damaged reputationally. A lot of them we've seen people don't want to put money into them anymore, those who rely on funding from outside. Denel is in a bad state, SAA is in a bad state. They're struggling to attract investors. I think that what the conversation that we should be having in South Africa is not just about replacing old people with new ones. We have to look at the systemic changes that need to happen so that nobody can ever go rogue on us again. People like to say that we've put people in there who don't have the right skills. Some of the people who stole us are very well educated. It's not just about education, it's about ethical leadership, which is lacking throughout.
And as you say that, Solly, I'm reminded of the derailed investigation that was done by former public protector Thuli Madonsela. And in that, she was looking at a process specifically, and they found mismanagement, and they also found maladministration, but not only within the board and the CEO level, but they also found mismanagement and unscrupulous behavior in procurement on the lower levels within the procurement structure as well, which speaks to what you're talking about, systemic changes of ethical leadership. And that leads me to my next question for you, Mr. Duvenhage. When we talk of systemic changes, what type of systemic changes does South Africa need, and what type of systemic changes do the SOEs need in order to have an intrinsic turnaround, which is not cosmetic, as Solly was saying? It's not merely about moving people around like chess pieces.
Yeah. Look, we think that the state needs to become more of an enabler as opposed to a participant in the business of business. If these entities are non-core, and we've seen SA as non-core, Denel is non-core, many of these entities should be palmed off or sold, or either given attract new equity partners that have majority shareholding, as happened at Telkom. And had they not done that, I think Telkom would have also been in a precarious position. So the problem is that the state is not agile. The state doesn't understand or know how to run complex and competitive businesses. I know they can put people in to do that, but the problem is they don't, because the state has different way of operating. It has political meddling. It has cadre deployment, even though they're trying to move away from that. It has cronyism, and it has to adhere to certain rules that make it not agile enough, so that when, for instance, business needs to go into a situation of 0% increases or salary cuts or no bonuses, under tough economic times, they do that. The state finds it hard to do that, especially when it's electioneering time. So we believe the systemic or the fundamental shift that needs to take place is that the state needs to get out of non-core businesses and to ensure that the laws and the rules are followed for businesses to come in and operate here, to flourish, to be competitive, to employ, and also to adhere to the rules. We've got a lot of oversight entities that can make sure that transformation takes place, that can make sure that workers are not abused. But to try and be the referee and the player at the same time in this competitive space of business, you can see exactly what happens. And that's why these state-owned entities, we believe, are largely in a mess.
Just to be clear, Wayne, are you proposing privatization? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about it. The state inherited in our new constitution and our democracy, we inherited an armaments business. We inherited airlines. Would the state go into that business or those businesses if they weren't there? In other words, why doesn't the state start its own vehicle manufacturing businesses now? Why not start a hotel chain? I mean, it would be ludicrous thinking. You cannot. Some of these entities just cannot compete with the international markets.
Let me ask you, Solly, are you in agreement with Wayne's proposition here that the state really has no business being in business, that theirs is to create an enabling environment? I would ask that these state-owned enterprises were inherited by the new dispensation. They were established, during apartheid South Africa, and they ran well during those times. Your view, Solly?
Well, there's an argument. We don't have to move from one extreme to the other. I think the extreme that Mr. Duvenhage is proposing, which I understand, is to take away political control or oversight or interference away from the state-owned institutions, because the real elephant in the room has been the extent to which politically deployed people were able to interfere, especially in procurement. We know that procurement positions are key, but I don't think that we need to necessarily get rid of them entirely. What we need to do, I would like a system where there's less access by politicians into governance structures. And maybe the best way to do it is to make sure that you have a level of private ownership of these institutions, which is majority, so that these people do not just come in there, pick up a call and say, listen, that big tender that's coming must go to Mr. So-and-so, which is what has been happening all along.
Mr. Duvenhage, the President has spoken before about a state-owned enterprise council that would look into issues such as governance. What would need to be in place for a body of this nature to really have an effect on state-owned enterprises and how they are run and how they perform?
We have so many oversight bodies. In fact, we set up DPE as a separate entity to look after the state-owned institutions. I mean, many of these items, SAA was in transport before and so on. So I think we're just moving the chess pieces around when you do this. I do like the idea that if not completely privatized, certainly bring in some majority shareholders, because that does put a dampener and a barrier between state interference and the business of that business. But another council, it might change things slightly, but let's use URBA, let's use these oversight bodies that we have, the auditing firms, let's use the public protector, let's use the commercial crimes courts, let's use all the current oversight, including Parliament, to fix. Bringing in another entity to try and exercise some oversight, I don't believe it's going to change things. I think we need to fundamentally shift our position on owning big businesses.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Moeng, as well as Mr. Duvenhage. If you could please continue to stay with us, we'll go for a short break and continue our discussion on the state of South Africa's SOEs when we return. Do stay with us. A very good afternoon to you. This is your daytime update right here on Newsroom Africa, Channel 405, as we continue looking into the state of South Africa's SOEs and trying to discern what could be the way forward. Joining us for this conversation is Mr. Solly Moeng, a brand strategist, as well as Mr. Wayne Duvenhage, the Chief Executive Officer at the organization Undoing Tax Abuse. Thank you, gentlemen, for staying with us. Before the break, I wanted to pose this next question to you, Mr. Moeng. We saw the role that Satawu played in 2012 as far as blowing the whistle on what was happening at PRASA, the allegations of mismanagement, of procurement being given to family and friends. What role do unions and what role does the public sector actually play in the transformation of the SOEs?
Well, look, we do need a level of consultation in changing and it has to be inclusive, of course. All the key players have to be in there. You can't exclude anybody. But what we do need to do is to acknowledge that while we've established awesome institutions since the beginning of our democracy, some of which were inherited from the past, what we've underestimated over time are the checks and balances. So the strength of those checks and balances, they have been weakened throughout. So all of these wonderful institutions and the processes that are in place to appoint people, to replace people, have been. Everything that's happened showed us that work needs to be done and to change things, to make it harder, for instance, for people to just be brought in there without sufficient consultation, without checking the background, their qualifications, experiences, but also the key. How do we get rid of people once they go rogue on us? One of the biggest problems we have is that there's no consequence. All the state institutions that we're talking about today have been messed up by people. None of those people are in prison. And that is a big problem. There are no consequences. A lot of it because there's political protection of people who shouldn't be protected politically.
And how then, Mr. Duvenhage, do you propose we go around this? We heard the President at the State Capture Commission today speaking about the fact that there's a systems failure in how boards are appointed and in how executives are appointed. The issue of cadre deployment has been one of the key focuses at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. What propositions would you have in this regard about the procurement of talented key personnel in boards?
Well, exactly. And I think we've been saying this for many years now. Civil society has been raising the flag on this issue, and it's been ignored. So what Mr. Moeng is saying is 100% correct. Something has to change, but until it changes, nothing is going to happen, and that's our frustration. So what do we do? How do we enforce meaningful oversight? And we are pleased to see recently in the national, on the board of the nuclear regulator, a civil activist being appointed, somebody from civil society, anti-nuclear, and that's a good start. We need to see more of this. We need to see role players being brought in to ensure that the right people, that contentious people that challenge the status quo are brought onto the boards. And even to this day, we saw recently in the URBA board appointments, old guard people being kept on to keep systems and processes possibly in place that have given rise to failures in that entity. Why is this the case? So we do need to, if we're going to try and fix things, we need to get politicians and the state to step back and allow these organizations to run. And what we saw 2 years ago when management was taking a hard stance and a rightful stance to stop salary increases at Eskom, was in an election year. What happened? They got a tap on the shoulder and they were told to allow those increases to go forward. That is interference. And now the management are being held accountable for a failing entity. That's the problem that we have here. So put in all the checks and balances that remove and take away state interference, government interference of any kind, and make things as transparent as possible so that civil society can raise the flags early enough rather than after the big deals have been done and the corruption and maladministration has taken place, because it's hard to undo those deals. It's just so sad to see us 7 years behind, 3 times the price on 2 power stations. That should never have happened. And that type of conduct continues to this day, by the way, in various state-owned entities.
Mr. Moeng, when one thinks of the African National Congress, one wouldn't be amiss in saying that cadre deployment is perhaps one of the hallmarks of the African National Congress. We heard the President at the State Capture Commission today being rather non-committal about getting rid of cadre deployment. But what he did say is that individuals who are appointed need to be, quote-unquote, fit for purpose. How does a ruling party not appoint those who are members of that party, who are loyal members of that party, into key strategic positions? Is that a likelihood you see becoming a reality?
Look, the president of the ANC has been saying, and others have been saying as well, cadre deployment is not unique to South Africa. It is true. All over the world, when new administrations come into power, they appoint people into positions to make sure they help them, implement and realize the promises for which they got elected. But the thing in South Africa is that this ANC has got old traditions and practices that are no longer suitable for South Africa. So what is good for the ANC is no longer good for South Africa, and what is good for South Africa is no longer good for the ANC. Now the ANC needs to make a separation between party and state, and it has failed to do that. So saying to us that cadre deployment is a global phenomenon is one thing, but what kind of people do you employ? What do you do with those people who commit crimes? Because actually all these people committed crimes. A lot of these people who've been cited, they've got huge implications of wrongdoing upon them, and the ANC is not able to punish them because some of the money is probably going to the party. I mean, this is still coming out of the state in the Zondo Commission. But I think we also need to put a mechanism in place to value and to protect whistleblowers. A lot of what we know would not be out there had there not been these awesome, intelligent, well-qualified, and ethical people who are sitting, hiding, who are not able to get jobs. Even the private sector is not touching some of them because they are afraid of losing their business with the state. It cannot be right. We need to protect and value whistleblowers, and we need to encourage the culture of whistleblowing.
Mr. Duvenhage, Mr. Moeng there spoke about the need for a separation of party and state, that the ANC needs to make this quite clear for themselves. When it comes to the appointment of key individuals into strategic positions, is this an opportunity perhaps for a decentralization of that authority, maybe making it more of a state responsibility as opposed to a party responsibility, which is what has led to cadre deployment? Is this something workable in your view, Mr. Duvenhage?
It could be, and it should be, by the way. So yes, but if it's done meaningfully and that they do so with the trust of civil society, and I think that's the big issue here. If you remove party and the state does get involved through the various mechanisms to appoint the right people, the talented people, that's the critical element that we require. Sadly, I think they struggle with that, and the ruling party, although it's losing a lot of its power, and you can see the transformation that's starting to take place within it because it realizes that the next elections are going to be extremely precarious for it, is having to change its ways. But our state has the lowest trust in our citizens in the government, as shown by the Edelman Trust Barometer, and unless the state can build trust in its citizens, it's going to not get this right. So do it meaningfully, get civil society and all stakeholders, by the way, not just civil society, involved in the processes that must unfold going forward. And I think we can. We're very positive that this country's potential is so massive. We should be flying well above, we're punching well below our weight. But the hole gets deeper and it's harder to get out of it if we don't do these things now. And let's get some traction going.
Mr. Moeng, what has been the impact as far as how South Africa's businesses are viewed and how the state is viewed and how SOEs are viewed with the issue of bailouts that state-owned enterprises have been enjoying? We remember in the last medium-term budget speech where SAA was given a 10.5 billion rand bailout by the Minister of Finance. What impact has that had?
Well, very big negative impact. I think South Africa has lost a huge potential credibility in terms of how we manage institutions, how we manage funds, whether they are public funds or private. And the public sector or the private sector has not played the part it should have, especially the audit firms. I think that the audit fraternity in South Africa needs to come out and tell us why they looked away or they enabled some things to happen that shouldn't have happened. They have not placed public interest at the heart of what they do. So as a result, investors are looking at us and asking the kind of questions that they never used to ask of South Africa because we used to be trusted. So all that credit or that reputational credit is gone. We have to build it because if we don't, people don't have to come to South Africa in order to do Africa. We need to sell ourselves as the gateway to Africa. People can go straight to Rwanda. They can go straight to other countries that they feel do things right. If we want to be trusted, reputation is important, and more companies will be afraid to do business with us, especially with their state-owned entities, when they see the kind of toxicity that has been coming out of them in recent years.
Gentlemen, I thank you so much for your time and your insights this afternoon.